The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, its walls displaying the flags of 700 species that had achieved spaceflight. Ambassador Vexthara of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted her breathing apparatus and tried to ignore the human sitting at the far end of the diplomatic table. The creature made her nervous in ways she couldn't explain. Admiral Sarah Chen wore a simple blue uniform that looked almost primitive compared to the energy-based clothing worn by other delegates. No fancy holograms, no shifting colors, no display of technological superiority. Just fabric and metal buttons. Yet every being in the chamber kept stealing glances at her, as if she were a predator that had wandered into a herbivore convention. "The matter before us today," announced High Arbiter Quindle in his melodic voice, "concerns the recent expansion of human colonies into the outer spiral territories." A ripple of unease passed through the assembled delegates. The humans had been expanding at an alarming rate since their admission to the Galactic Council 50 years ago. What made it worse was their complete disregard for the established protocols of colonization. Vexthara activated her speaking crystal. "Your Excellency, the Zephyrian Empire must protest these continued violations of interstellar law. The humans have established settlements on no fewer than 47 worlds that were clearly marked as hazardous in our stellar cartography database." Admiral Chen didn't even look up from the tablet she was reviewing. "Hazardous by whose standards?" "By any reasonable standard," chirped Delegate Piptok of the consortium. "These worlds are classified as death planets, gravity wells that would crush most species, atmospheric compositions that would dissolve our breathing apparatus, radiation levels that would kill us in minutes. No civilized being would attempt to live on such worlds." "And yet," Chen said calmly, finally looking up, "humans thrive on them. We've been sending you productivity reports. These colonies are already contributing more raw materials to galactic trade than some of your core worlds." The statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several delegates activated their translation devices, certain they had misheard. Arbiter Quindle consulted his records. "Admiral Chen, these reports. They indicate mining operations on worlds with surface temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Kelvin, atmospheric pressure that would implode our spacecraft, and gravitational forces that would prevent most of our heavy machinery from functioning." "That's correct. How is this possible?" Chen stood, and despite her modest height, somehow seemed to tower over the assembly. "Because humans evolved on what you call a death world. Our planet has weather patterns that would terrify your greatest warriors, tectonic activity that reshapes continents, and a biosphere so competitive that most of our species' advancement has come from learning to survive nature itself." She gestured to the chamber's main display, which flickered to life, showing Earth. "This is our homeworld. Notice the massive storm systems that could swallow smaller planets, the volcanic activity that regularly destroys entire regions, the fact that our planet is 70% covered in liquid that would drown most of you, populated by creatures that would consider many of you a light snack." Delegate Morgoth of the Hegemony activated his speaker. "This is precisely why we must restrict human expansion. Your species is clearly adapted for violence and destruction. You represent a threat to galactic stability." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees as every human present turned to look at Morgoth. Chen's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes that made the large reptilian delegate step back from his podium. "Delegate Morgoth," Chen said quietly, "would you care to elaborate on that statement?" That is, your species has demonstrated concerning capabilities. Your colonists work in environments that would kill our military forces within minutes. Your industrial capacity on these death worlds exceeds what established civilizations achieve on optimal planets. This suggests a capacity for warfare that..." "That what?" The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient sounds of life support systems seemed muted as every delegate waited for Chen's response to what amounted to a direct accusation of human militarism. Chen walked slowly around the diplomatic table, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. "Delegate Morgoth raises an interesting point. Should the galaxy fear humanity because we're capable of surviving in environments you consider impossible? Should we be restricted because we can build thriving cities on worlds you've written off as uninhabitable?" She stopped directly in front of the Hegemony delegation. "Or perhaps the real concern is that your empires have become so comfortable, so soft, that the mere existence of a species that still remembers how to struggle threatens your sense of superiority. Vexthara's breathing apparatus whistled in alarm. The human was directly challenging the hegemony, one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces. This was unprecedented diplomatic aggression. Admiral Chen, Arbiter Quindle interjected, please return to your designated speaking area. We must maintain proper protocol. Chen smiled, and somehow that expression was more unsettling than her previous intensity. Of course, Arbiter, we humans are very respectful of proper protocol. As she walked back to her seat, she continued speaking. But since we're discussing protocols and proper behavior, perhaps we should address some inconsistencies in how these protocols are applied. She activated her own holographic display, showing a star map of the galaxy. Red zones indicated restricted areas, yellow showed contested territories, and green marked free expansion zones. This is fascinating reading, Chen said, highlighting various sectors. According to galactic law, all species have equal rights to colonize unmarked territories, yet somehow the Zephyrian Empire has claimed exclusive mining rights to 17 systems in the outer spiral, despite never establishing colonies there. The hegemony has military patrol zones that extend well beyond their official borders. The consortium has trade embargo zones that mysteriously coincide with areas rich in rare minerals. The display zoomed in on specific systems. But humans are told we cannot colonize worlds that you've simply declared too dangerous to be worth your time. Worlds that, according to your own surveys, have no strategic value because they're uninhabitable death traps. Delegate Piptok's feathers ruffled in agitation. Those regulations exist for the safety of all galactic citizens. Do they? Or do they exist because none of your species can actually use those worlds, so you've convinced yourselves they're worthless? Meanwhile, you maintain claims on thousands of garden worlds that you're saving for future expansion, most of which have remained untouched for centuries. Chen's data display shifted to show resource extraction numbers. In the 50 years since humans joined the Galactic Council, we've contributed more raw materials than the previous century of galactic mining operations. We've done this by settling worlds you abandoned, working in conditions you can't survive, and asking for nothing more than the basic rights supposedly guaranteed to all council members. This proves our point exactly, Morgoth rumbled. Your species thrives on destruction and chaos. You seek out the most dangerous, most hostile environments in the galaxy and somehow flourish there. This is not natural behavior. Chen's expression hardened. You're right, Delegate. It's not natural behavior. It's learned behavior. Do you know what my grandfather did for a living? He was a deep-sea welder working at pressures that would crush your spacecraft, in water so cold it would freeze your blood in seconds, surrounded by creatures that could swallow him whole. Do you know what he told me about that job? The chamber waited. He said it was relaxing compared to farming during Dust Bowl season. Several delegates activated their translation systems again, certain this was another human idiom they were missing. Chen gestured to the star map. Every world you've marked as uninhabitable reminds us of home. Every hostile environment you've fled from looks like a vacation resort to species that learned to build civilization while dodging predators that could tear through your battle armor with their teeth. She highlighted Earth again. This is a planet where the weather regularly generates electrical discharges powerful enough to vaporize spacecraft, where seismic activity can split continents, where the dominant species learned to create fire by rubbing sticks together while hiding from creatures that could bite through steel. And now, she continued, her voice carrying across the vast chamber, you want to restrict our expansion because we're too good at surviving in places you're afraid to visit. Arbiter Quindle consulted with his advisors before speaking. Admiral Chen, the Council's concerns are not entirely unreasonable. Your species' rapid expansion and apparent immunity to environmental hazards does raise questions about future galactic stability. Perhaps we could establish a monitoring system. No. The single word cut through the diplomatic pleasantries like a blade. Every delegate in the chamber turned to stare at the human admiral. I'm sorry, Quindle asked. Chen stood again, and this time her posture was purely military. I said no, Arbiter. Humanity will not submit to monitoring, restriction, or any other limitation based on our ability to survive in environments that you find challenging. Admiral Vexthara interjected, you must understand our position. Your species' capabilities are unprecedented. So were the Zephyrians' atmospheric processors when they joined the Council. So were the hegemony's military technologies. So were the consortium's trade networks. Each species brings unique capabilities to galactic civilization. Ours happen to include the ability to live and work on planets that you've declared uninhabitable. Chen activated a new display showing human colonies throughout the galaxy. These settlements represent families, communities, entire civilizations built on worlds where you couldn't survive for 5 minutes without life support. We're not conquering anyone's territory. We're not threatening anyone's interests. We're building homes in places you've abandoned as worthless. But these capabilities could be turned to military purposes, Morgoth insisted. Chen's smile returned, cold and calculating. Delegate Morgoth, are you suggesting that the galaxy should fear humanity because we're difficult to kill? The implications of that statement rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. Every military advisor present began running calculations, considering what it would mean to fight a war against beings who considered Deathworlds to be prime real estate. Because if that's your concern, Chen continued, perhaps you should ask yourselves why you're so worried about the defensive capabilities of a species that has never initiated aggression against any council member. She let that sink in before continuing. Humanity seeks only what every species in this chamber has already claimed, the right to expand, to build, to thrive according to our own nature. The difference is that our nature allows us to thrive in places you fear to tread. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated voices as delegates conferred with their advisors. The implications were staggering. If humans could colonize and industrialize death worlds, they could potentially control resources that were completely inaccessible to other species. More troubling still, if they could live and work in such environments, what did that suggest about their potential military capabilities? Arbiter Quindle called for order. Admiral Chen, surely you understand the Council's need to ensure galactic stability. Your species' unique adaptations do create an unprecedented situation. They do indeed, Chen agreed. For the first time in galactic history, worlds that have been written off as useless are becoming productive colonies. Resources that were considered permanently inaccessible are entering galactic markets. Territory that every empire has ignored is being transformed into thriving settlements. She paused, letting the economic implications settle in. I understand that this is disruptive to established power structures. When someone else's wasteland becomes your competitor's industrial center, it changes the strategic balance. Vexthara's breathing apparatus wheezed as she processed this. The Zephyrian Empire controlled vast territories, but much of their space contained worlds they couldn't use. If humans could settle and develop those worlds. Are you threatening galactic economic stability? She asked. I'm stating facts about galactic economic reality, Chen replied. Human colonies are already contributing to galactic prosperity in ways that were impossible 50 years ago. This benefits everyone through increased trade, resource availability, and technological exchange. Unless, she added quietly, someone decides that humanity's contributions are a threat that needs to be contained. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop another few degrees. Every delegate understood the subtext. The humans weren't just statting their position, they were drawing a line in the sand. Delegate Morgoth activated his speaker again. And if the Council decides that restrictions are necessary for galactic security. Admiral Chen looked directly at the massive reptilian delegate, and her expression was no longer diplomatic. Then the Council would be making a very serious mistake. Is that a threat? Morgoth demanded. It's a fact, Chen replied calmly. You're concerned about humanity's defensive capabilities because we can survive on death worlds. You should be more concerned about what happens when a species that learned to thrive under impossible conditions decides that the galaxy's self-appointed rulers are standing in the way of their family's future. The chamber fell into absolute silence. The humans had just delivered what amounted to a diplomatic ultimatum to the entire Galactic Council. Arbiter Quindle's voice was carefully controlled when he spoke. Admiral Chen, are you suggesting that humanity would resist Council authority? I'm suggesting that humanity will continue expanding into unclaimed territory regardless of artificial restrictions imposed by species that are afraid of competition. If the Council wants to maintain stability, it should focus on managing that reality rather than trying to prevent it. Chen gathered her materials and stood to leave. This session has been enlightening. Humanity will await the Council's decision. But understand this, we didn't survive on a death world by backing down when someone decided we were too dangerous to be allowed to thrive. As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, the remaining delegates sat in stunned silence. They had expected to discuss mining rights and colonization protocols. Instead, they had just witnessed the most powerful species in the galaxy receive notice that their monopoly on expansion was about to end. And worse yet, they were beginning to realize that there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in the Galactic Council chambers, and the political landscape of the galaxy was shifting like sand in a windstorm. Fleet Admiral Marcus Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the human battleship Indomitable, watching the construction of Forge Station in the Kepler 442 system. What made this particular space station noteworthy wasn't its size or technological sophistication, but its location, built directly into the corona of an active star. "Status report," Rodriguez requested as Captain Elena Vasquez joined him at the viewport. "Construction is ahead of schedule, Admiral. The hegemony blockade hasn't interfered with operations, mainly because they're maintaining what they call a safe distance of 15 AU from the star. Our workers are operating at 2 AU and closing." Rodriguez smiled grimly. The hegemony had declared the Kepler 442 system a restricted zone 3 weeks ago, claiming that human industrial operations near the star posed a navigation hazard to galactic shipping. The real reason was becoming increasingly clear as intelligence reports filtered in from across the galaxy. "What about the Zephyrian response to our Tau Ceti operations?" "Complete withdrawal from the system, sir. They're claiming the gravity wells around the binary pulsars are too unstable for safe industrial operations. Our engineering teams have been extracting rare minerals from the neutron star debris field for 6 weeks now." Through the reinforced viewport, they could see human workers in environmental suits that were closer to personal spacecraft than traditional work gear. These weren't the bulky, life support-dependent suits worn by other species. Human EVA equipment was sleek, efficient, and designed for environments that would destroy conventional technology. "Admiral," came a voice from behind them. "Priority communication from Earth Command." Rodriguez turned to see Communications Officer Park holding a secure tablet. The message was brief but significant. The Galactic Council had reached a decision regarding humanity's expansion. "Patch it through to the main display," Rodriguez ordered. The holographic projector activated, showing Admiral Chen in her office on Earth. Her expression was carefully neutral, which Rodriguez recognized as a bad sign. "Marcus, I'm transmitting the Council's formal response to our colonization activities. The short version is that they're implementing what they call the Environmental Protection Protocols. Effective immediately, any species seeking to colonize worlds classified as Class 9 or Class 10 hazardous environments must receive Council approval and submit to ongoing monitoring." Rodriguez felt his jaw clench. "Let me guess. The approval process involves extensive review by the same species who have declared these worlds uninhabitable. Worse, the monitoring requirement includes Council oversight of our industrial operations, population limits on our colonies, and mandatory safety inspectors from member species." Chen's expression hardened. "They're also requiring that we share our environmental adaptation technologies with all Council members." Captain Vasquez whistled low. "They want us to give them the ability to compete with our colonies while simultaneously restricting our expansion." "That's exactly what they want," Chen confirmed. "But here's the interesting part. The Zephyrian Empire has simultaneously announced a new expansion initiative into the outer spiral, claiming 17 systems that they've ignored for 3 centuries. The hegemony is mobilizing survey fleets to reassess the habitability of worlds they previously classified as uninhabitable. The consortium is suddenly very interested in establishing mining rights on planets they couldn't even land on last year." The implications were crystal clear. The galactic powers had decided that if they couldn't restrict human expansion through legal means, they would compete for territory and resources using humanity's own success as justification. "What are our orders, Admiral?" Rodriguez asked. Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut through hull plating. Earth Command has decided that the environmental protection protocols represent an unacceptable restriction on human sovereignty. We will not be complying. Sir, that's essentially a declaration of independence from Council authority. Yes, Captain Vasquez, it is. And more than that, we're going to demonstrate exactly why the galaxy's established powers should have thought twice before trying to contain a species that learned to thrive under pressure. The holographic display shifted to show a star map of human space. Red indicators marked new construction projects, blue showed established colonies, and green indicated planned expansion routes. Operation Breakout begins in 72 hours, Chen announced. We're simultaneously launching colonization efforts on 53 worlds that the Council has now classified as restricted under the new protocols. All of these worlds are currently unclaimed, uninhabited, and have been written off by every other species as uninhabitable death worlds. Rodriguez studied the map. The scope was staggering. Admiral, this will be the largest simultaneous expansion in galactic history. And we're going to complete it before anyone else can mount an effective response. Marcus, your task force will lead the expansion into the hegemony's backyard. I want human colonies established on every world they've marked as too dangerous to approach. The tactical implications began falling into place. The hegemony controlled vast sectors of space, but their actual presence was limited to a few hundred garden worlds that met their species' environmental requirements. If humans could establish thriving colonies on the worlds the hegemony couldn't use, they would effectively control resources and territory that the hegemony claimed but couldn't access. What about military resistance? Captain Vasquez asked. Chen's expression turned predatory. That brings me to the most important part of this briefing. Intelligence indicates that the Zephyrian Empire is mobilizing their main fleet with the intention of enforcing the environmental protection protocols. They plan to blockade human expansion efforts and force compliance with Council authority. How many ships are we talking about? Approximately 1,500 vessels, including their largest dreadnoughts. The hegemony is providing support vessels, and the consortium is offering logistics coordination. It's the largest military alliance assembled since the Galactic Council was formed. Rodriguez felt a familiar tightness in his chest. 1,500 ships was an overwhelming force by any conventional measure. The human fleet numbered fewer than 300 vessels, and most of those were designed for exploration and colony support rather than combat. Sir, those odds are irrelevant, Chen interrupted. Because they're thinking about this problem all wrong. They're planning to fight a conventional space war against an enemy that operates by conventional rules. But we're not conventional, are we, Marcus? Rodriguez began to understand. The Death Worlds. Exactly. Every human colony is established on a planet that would kill them within hours. Their fleets need supply bases, repair facilities, and safe harbors. We don't. Our colonies are already situated in environments that no other species can survive in, which means they're essentially immune to conventional attack. The strategic picture was becoming clear. The galactic powers were planning to fight a war against an enemy that could retreat to places they couldn't follow, hide in environments they couldn't enter, and strike from bases they couldn't assault. But there's more, Chen continued. We're not just going to establish colonies and wait for them to attack. We're going to demonstrate exactly what happens when you threaten the families and homes of a species that evolved to fight for survival every single day. The star map shifted again, showing planned human operations throughout the galaxy. Phase 2 of Operation Breakout involves establishing human presence on strategic worlds throughout Council space. Not invasion, not conquest, just colonization of planets that they've abandoned as uninhabitable. By the time they realize what's happening, humans will control the resources and territory that their entire economy depends on, but which they've never been able to access. Rodriguez stared at the display. It was audacious beyond belief. Admiral, you're talking about economic warfare on a galactic scale. I'm talking about collecting the debt that the galaxy owes humanity for 50 years of second-class treatment. Every restriction they've placed on us, every territory they've denied us access to, every resource they've claimed but never used while telling us we can't have it. Chen's image leaned forward. Marcus, your grandfather fought in the water wars on Earth. Do you remember what he told you about fighting a superior enemy? You don't fight their war. You fight your war and make them adapt to your rules. Exactly. The Zephyrians want to fight a fleet engagement in open space where they have numerical superiority. Instead, we're going to fight an economic war on Deathworlds where they can't even maintain a presence. The hegemony wants to use military force to control territory they've never been able to develop. We're going to show them what that territory is actually worth in the hands of people who know how to use it. A new voice entered the conversation as Admiral Sarah Chen's image was joined by General Patricia Liu, head of human colonial forces. Admiral Rodriguez, General Liu here. I wanted to brief you personally on the defensive preparations for Phase 2. We're not just establishing colonies, we're creating fortress worlds. The display shifted to show detailed plans for colonial defense systems. Every new human settlement will be established with full industrial capacity, defensive installations built into the planetary environment itself, and survival capability that doesn't depend on external supply lines. If they want to attack human colonies, they'll have to fight us on planets where they can't breathe, can't survive, and can't bring their heavy equipment. Captain Vasquez studied the plans. General, these defensive systems, they're designed to use the planetary environment as a weapon. Exactly right, Captain. Fortress worlds built into volcanic systems where the defensive installations are powered by geothermal taps that would melt their ships. Mining colonies on worlds with gravity so intense that conventional spacecraft can't achieve orbit. Industrial centers on planets with atmospheric pressure that would crush their landing craft. Rodriguez was beginning to appreciate the full scope of what Earth Command was planning. We're not just expanding into uninhabitable worlds. We're turning those worlds into military assets that no one else can counter. And that, Admiral Chen said, is how a species that learned to survive on a death world collects its due from empires that thought they could keep us contained. The communication ended, leaving Rodriguez and his staff to contemplate the magnitude of what they were about to undertake. Through the viewport, Forge Station continued its construction in the star's corona, human engineers working in an environment that would vaporize any other species' technology. Captain Vasquez, signal the fleet. Prepare for immediate deployment to Phase 2 objectives. Aye, sir. Admiral, what do we tell the crews about our mission parameters? Rodriguez looked out at the impossible construction taking place in the heart of a star. Tell them we're going home, to worlds that remind us where we came from and why no one in this galaxy should ever make the mistake of thinking that humans can be contained. As the Indomitable prepared to depart for the first of the targeted systems, intelligence reports were already filtering in from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire was mobilizing their fleet, but they were also quietly withdrawing personnel from forward positions in systems that contained worlds suitable for human colonization. The hegemony was issuing diplomatic protests while simultaneously relocating their supply bases away from star systems that humans might find attractive. The consortium was taking a different approach. Intelligence suggested they were actually preparing to open diplomatic channels with human colonies, apparently deciding that trading with humans was preferable to fighting them. Most telling of all, several smaller species were quietly reaching out to human diplomatic offices, expressing interest in mutual defense agreements and trade partnerships. The galaxy's minor powers were beginning to realize that the balance of power was shifting, and they wanted to be on the right side of the change. As the human fleet departed Kepler 442, heading for their Phase 2 objectives, Admiral Rodriguez reflected on Admiral Chen's words about collecting debts. For 50 years, humanity had been treated as junior members of galactic civilization, restricted in their expansion, limited in their influence, and constantly reminded that they were newcomers who needed to know their place. But those same restrictions had driven humanity to excel in areas where other species had failed. They had learned to thrive on worlds that others feared, to build industries in environments that others couldn't enter, and to create self-sufficient colonies that didn't depend on the galactic trade networks controlled by the established powers. Now, as the galaxy's empires mobilized to contain human expansion, they were about to discover that they had created exactly the kind of enemy they were least equipped to fight. One that could survive anywhere, needed nothing from them, and had spent 50 years learning to resent being told what they couldn't do. The debt was about to be collected in full. And when it was over, the galaxy would understand why you should never try to contain a species that learned to build civilization while living on a world that actively tried to kill them every single day. The war that was coming wouldn't be fought in the vast emptiness of space between stars. It would be fought on worlds where only humans could survive, for resources that only humans could extract, using tactics that only a death world species would be crazy enough to attempt. And by the time the galactic empires realized their mistake, human colonies would be producing resources and controlling territory that the galaxy's economy had depended on for millennia, but which they had never been able to access themselves. The Deathworlders were about to collect their due, and whole galactic empires would fall before they were finished. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula lasted exactly 14 minutes, and when it was over, the Zephyrian Empire's 1,500-ship armada had been reduced to debris and desperate escape pods. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the human flagship Prometheus, watching the aftermath of what military historians would later call the most decisive naval engagement in galactic history. But the real story wasn't the battle itself. It was what had happened in the 6 months leading up to it, and what was happening right now across 5,000 star systems as the galaxy's established powers discovered that their empires were crumbling from within. "Final casualty reports, Admiral," reported Captain Morrison, his voice carefully controlled despite the magnitude of what they had witnessed. "Human losses: 17 fighters damaged, 3 destroyed. Total personnel lost, 9 killed, 23 wounded." Chen nodded, though the loss of even a single human life weighed heavily on her. "Zephyrian losses: complete destruction of their main battle line, approximately 200,000 casualties, 700 ships destroyed outright, 300 disabled beyond repair. The remainder are scattered across 16 star systems, most with critical damage." The numbers were staggering, but they weren't the result of superior human firepower. They were the inevitable consequence of a fundamental misunderstanding about how humans conducted warfare. "Sir," came a voice from the communications station. "Priority message from Earth Command. The hegemony has formally requested immediate ceasefire negotiations." Chen almost smiled. "Response time." "The message was transmitted 43 minutes ago, sir, before our engagement with the Zephyrian fleet concluded." Which meant the hegemony had been monitoring the battle, and had sent their surrender request the moment they realized how badly outmatched the galaxy's combined forces were against human tactics. "And the consortium. Unconditional surrender transmitted 90 minutes ago. They're requesting immediate trade negotiations and offering preferential partner status for all human commercial interests." The consortium, at least, had been paying attention to economic reports rather than military posturing. They had realized that human colonies were producing materials that their empire literally couldn't survive without, and had decided that fighting for control was less profitable than negotiating for access. "Admiral," Captain Morrison said quietly, "the Zephyrian commander is requesting permission to transmit a personal message." Chen considered this. Admiral Vexthara had been one of the most vocal advocates for containing human expansion. Hearing what she had to say might be instructive. "Put her through." The main display flickered to life, showing the interior of a badly damaged Zephyrian command ship. Admiral Vexthara's breathing apparatus was cracked, and her uniform showed the strain of a battle that had gone very wrong very quickly. "Admiral Chen," she began, her voice carrying through the translation system with an odd harmonic that suggested significant distress. We need to understand what happened here. Our tactical analysis indicated overwhelming numerical superiority. Our weapons systems are rated for ship-to-ship combat against any known technology. Our fleet commanders have centuries of experience in large-scale engagements." Chen waited. This wasn't a surrender negotiation. This was a request for comprehension from someone whose entire understanding of warfare had just been shattered. "How did you destroy our entire battle formation without engaging in direct combat?" And there it was, the question that would reshape galactic military doctrine for the next millennium. "Admiral Vexthara," Chen replied, "you made the same mistake that every empire in this galaxy has been making for centuries. You assumed that warfare is about ship-to-ship combat between fleets of equivalent vessels operating under similar environmental constraints." The display shifted to show tactical recordings of the engagement. What it revealed would have been impossible for any other species to achieve, and was only possible for humans because of their unique adaptation to hostile environments. Your fleet entered this system expecting to find human ships arranged in conventional battle formation, prepared for a standard engagement. Instead, you found human vessels operating inside the nebula itself, using the radiation and electromagnetic interference as camouflage. Vexthara's breathing apparatus wheezed. But the radiation levels in there would kill any crew within hours. The electromagnetic interference would disable all ship systems. The gravitational anomalies would tear conventional vessels apart. Yes, Chen agreed. They would. For species that require life support systems, electromagnetic sensitive technology, and structurally uniform vessels, humans don't operate under those limitations. The tactical display showed the actual engagement. Human ships had emerged from positions inside the nebula that should have been impossible to survive, moving through electromagnetic storms that would have disabled any other species' technology, and conducting coordinated attacks from angles that conventional military doctrine said were inaccessible. Our ships are built to operate on Deathworlds, Chen explained. They're hardened against radiation levels that would cook your crews, electromagnetic interference that would shut down your systems, and gravitational stress that would crush your hulls. What you call impossible environment, we call home field advantage. But the space battle was only part of the story, and Chen knew that Vexthara was beginning to understand the larger implications. "Admiral," the Zephyrian commander said slowly, "our intelligence reports indicate that human colonies have been established on over 300 worlds in the past 6 months. These worlds control access to resources that our industries require for basic operation." "That's correct. And all of these worlds are classified as uninhabitable death worlds that our species cannot survive on." "Also correct." There was a long pause as Vexthara processed this. "Admiral Chen, are you telling me that humanity has gained control over resources that are essential to galactic commerce, but which are completely inaccessible to the species that depend on them?" Chen's smile was not pleasant. "Admiral Vexthara, I'm telling you that humanity has gained control over resources that were always essential to galactic commerce, but which the galaxy's established powers never bothered to develop because they couldn't survive the extraction process." The implications were staggering. For millennia, galactic empires had built their economies around trade routes, resource extraction from habitable worlds, and control of space-based mining operations. They had simply written off entire categories of planets as uninhabitable and therefore economically irrelevant. But those planets contained vast mineral wealth, unique chemical compounds, and energy sources that were actually crucial to galactic industry. The empires had simply never been able to access them, so they had built their economic models around working around these limitations. Humans had just eliminated those limitations. "Admiral," Vexthara continued, "our economic analysts are reporting that human colonies are producing rare earth minerals that our technology requires, energy crystals that power our city ships, and chemical compounds that our pharmaceutical industries need for basic medical supplies. If human production were to cease, your empire would begin experiencing critical shortages within weeks," Chen confirmed. "Industrial production would halt within months. Your medical system would collapse within a year. And you've achieved this by colonizing worlds that we considered worthless. We've achieved this by colonizing worlds that you couldn't use, but which contain resources your economy depends on." Chen gestured to the tactical display, which now showed resource extraction reports from human colonies throughout the galaxy. "For 50 years, your empires have treated humanity as junior partners in galactic civilization. You've restricted our expansion, limited our territorial claims, and constantly reminded us that we needed to earn our place in the established order. Meanwhile, you've been sitting on territorial claims that include vast resource deposits you couldn't access, controlling trade routes that depend on materials you couldn't extract, and building military forces to protect economic assets you couldn't develop." The scope of the strategic reversal was becoming clear. "We've spent the past 6 months establishing colonies on worlds you abandoned, developing resources you couldn't reach, and building industrial capacity in environments you can't enter. Your economies now depend on human production, your military forces require resources controlled by human colonies, and your territorial claims are effectively worthless without human cooperation." Vexthara was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, Her voice carried the weight of someone who was beginning to understand that her entire civilization had just become economically dependent on the species they had tried to contain. Admiral Chen, what are humanity's terms for continued resource cooperation? And there it was, the moment when a galactic empire asked a Death World species for permission to survive. Chen's expression became businesslike. Admiral, I'm not authorized to negotiate on behalf of all humanity, but I can tell you that Earth Command's position is quite simple. Humanity will continue developing resources and establishing colonies on worlds that meet our environmental requirements. We will trade these resources with species that recognize human territorial claims and treat human colonies with the respect due to sovereign settlements. And species that attempt to restrict or control human expansion will discover that their economies are more fragile than they realized. The communication channel closed, leaving Chen's staff to contemplate what they had just witnessed. In the span of 6 months, humanity had gone from being a junior member of galactic civilization to being an essential partner that the galaxy's empires couldn't survive without. Admiral, reported the communications officer, we're receiving diplomatic requests from 43 species. All of them are requesting immediate trade negotiations and recognition of human territorial claims. And the holdouts? The hegemony is requesting military alliance discussions. The consortium has offered to restructure all galactic trade agreements to give humanity preferential status. Even the minor empires are offering tribute arrangements. Captain Morrison reviewed the diplomatic reports. Sir, this is unprecedented. We're receiving offers of economic partnership from species that were demanding our restrictions 6 months ago. Chen nodded. Captain, what did Admiral Rodriguez report from the outer spiral operations? Complete success, sir. Human colonies have been established on every strategic world that the hegemony claimed but couldn't develop. They're reporting industrial capacity that exceeds the hegemony's total output from their habitable worlds. And the Zephyrian territories. Admiral Singh reports that human settlements are producing energy crystals at 10 times the rate of the Zephyrians' conventional mining operations. They're requesting additional industrial equipment to meet galactic demand. The scope of the transformation was stunning. In 6 months, humanity had established economic leverage over empires that had controlled vast sectors of the galaxy for millennia. Sir, came another report, long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements throughout the galaxy. Every major power is withdrawing military vessels from forward positions and consolidating around their core systems. Chen understood. The empires were pulling back their forces because they had finally realized that military control over territory was meaningless if you couldn't survive on the planets that contained the resources your economy needed. Admiral, Captain Morrison said quietly, I think we need to consider the possibility that we've just fundamentally altered the balance of galactic civilization. Chen looked out at the debris field that had once been the galaxy's most powerful fleet. Captain, we haven't altered the balance of galactic civilization. We've revealed what that balance actually was. She gestured to the strategic displays showing human colonies throughout the galaxy. For centuries, these empires have built their power on controlling territory and resources that they could access. They created political structures based on their environmental limitations and called it natural law. But natural law doesn't care about political structures. It only cares about adaptation and survival. The empires forgot that civilizations rise and fall based on their ability to extract resources from their environment and defend their territory against threats. Humans just reminded them that we're very good at both of those things. The strategic reports continued flooding in. Human colonies were reporting successful establishment on worlds that ranged from the crushing gravity of super-Earths to the radiation-soaked surfaces of planets orbiting unstable stars. Industrial production was exceeding all projections, and resource extraction operations were producing materials that had been considered rare or impossible to obtain for millennia. More importantly, every human colony was reporting complete self-sufficiency. Unlike other species settlements, human colonies didn't depend on supply lines from their home worlds. They were established with full industrial capacity, defensive installations integrated into the planetary environment, and survival systems that used local resources. This meant that human colonies couldn't be starved out, blockaded, or conquered using conventional military tactics. They were, in effect, immune to the power projection methods that had defined galactic warfare for centuries. "Admiral," reported the intelligence officer, "we're receiving analysis reports from various Imperial think tanks. The consensus appears to be that conventional military force cannot effectively challenge human expansion, because human settlements are established in environments that other species cannot assault or occupy." Chen nodded. This was exactly what Earth Command had planned for. "What about economic warfare?" "Impossible, sir. Human colonies are completely self-sufficient and are producing resources that the empires need but cannot obtain elsewhere. Any attempt at economic pressure would damage the empires more than humanity." The strategic picture was complete. Humanity had achieved something that no species in galactic history had managed: complete economic and military independence while simultaneously becoming essential to galactic civilization. "Admiral," Captain Morrison said, "what happens now?" Chen considered the question. The old order was collapsing as galactic empires realized that their power structures were built on foundations that a Death World species could simply ignore. The new order would be built around cooperation with humanity rather than attempts to control human expansion. "Now, Captain, we get to find out what galactic civilization looks like when it's built around species that learn to thrive under impossible conditions rather than species that learn to control others. And the empires? The ones that adapt will survive. The ones that don't will discover that they've built their civilizations on resources they can't access, territory they can't defend, and assumptions about survival that don't apply to species from Death Worlds." Chen looked out at the stars, where human colonies were transforming the galaxy's economic and strategic landscape. "The debt has been collected, Captain. Now we get to see what the galaxy builds with the change." In the months that followed, 3 of the galaxy's major empires would restructure their entire governmental systems to accommodate humanity's emergence as the dominant force in galactic affairs. 2 empires would collapse entirely as their populations migrated to human-controlled territory in search of economic opportunities and resources that their own governments couldn't provide. The remaining powers would learn to build their civilizations around partnership with humanity rather than competition, understanding finally that when you threaten the families and homes of a species that evolved on a death world, you don't get a war. You get an entirely new galaxy where the rules are written by beings who learned that survival means never backing down, never giving up, and never accepting limitations imposed by those who are afraid to face the environments where life is truly tested. The Deathworlders had collected their due, and when the accounting was finished, the galaxy belonged to those who had earned it through the simple process of refusing to die when everything around them was trying to kill them.